If you'll call the roll to establish a quorum.
Member Sulpicio Hull?
Here.
Member Guerrero? Here. Member Early?
Here.
President Villegas?
Present. And we are missing Commissioner Orozco. But sufficient to have a quorum, so we will move forward. The commission did meet in closed session, and somebody want to report out?
The commission didn't take any reportable action.
Very good. All right. Leading us off with the Pledge of Allegiance, Commissioner, would you lead us in?
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, liberty and justice for all.
All right, jumped out of order a little bit there. Okay, so item 2 is presentations by the public on matters that are not on the agenda but within the subject matter jurisdiction. Madam Clerk, do we have any correspondence or any slips to speak on items that are not on the agenda?
We have no request to speak.
All right. Are we anticipating anybody wanted to speak on items not on the agenda?
I have received no request to speak up until this point.
All right, very good. We'll move forward unless otherwise noted. So with that, we go to item 3, which is the consent agenda item, which is consideration and approval of the minutes of the May 1st regularly scheduled meeting.
To approve.
So we have a motion to approve the minutes,
Second.
and we have a second to approve the minutes. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed? All right, that motion carries with 4 votes. Regular agenda item is item 4, and that's consideration of the resolution P 24-3, approving the port budget for fiscal year 24-25. And I believe, Rick, is that yours?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, commissioners. A PowerPoint for the budget presentation, fairly brief. Get right to it. So first we'll start with a recap of current fiscal year and specifically the maritime activity in fiscal year 23-24. So we had a great year. You can see we were over 900,000 metric tons of cargo, which is right about at our, since the city's been managing the port, right about a high water mark. And that generated a high water mark of 585,000 in revenue share from SSA for the North Terminal lease. And you can see that our tonnage for both the rice and the cement was up for the year. So great year. All right, this thing is a life of its own. I just want to make sure I'm not missing something. Okay, so just a little more narrative on the current fiscal year. Revenues are coming in 3.67 million. Very stable maritime and non-maritime revenues. Expenses, very stable, holding the line on expenses. We enjoyed a property tax, a property insurance. It's a property insurance reduction. We don't pay property tax. Property insurance reduction this year, resulting in a net income of just about $2 million. Again, our best financial performance to date. And this year and previous years, those net operating profits generated a cash balance as of a year ago, July 1 of 23, of 8.6 million, which put us in a great position to spend some money, some cash, and I'll get into that here. So we spent almost $5 million this year. 3 major expenditures: the Enterprise Crossing study, our share of that, 1/3 of that contract was paid by the port. Secondly, as you recall at the last meeting, the port repaid the $2.1 million Stone Lock acquisition loan, and the city will make good use of those funds. It will go straight back to Measure G. And finally, the Seaway infrastructure project, which is imminent, 1.3+ million for that. So a very robust year for cash one-time expenditures. So that was the 23-24 summary. Moving on to the 24-25 budget proposal. The budget column highlighted in green is the proposal for 24-25. The detail to that is provided as an attachment to the resolution, which is attached to the agenda report. I'll just highlight a few things and talk about those items in a little more detail. But we're always conservative when we budget for revenues, particularly on the maritime side, some of which comes from revenue share agreements with SSA, CEMEX, and Rail. So we're always conservative on that projection. We had a big year this year, so I don't make that assumption going forward. So that is most of the explanation for why we're budgeting less on the revenue side. On the expense side, we're up a bit. We've added a full-time senior program manager. And as usual, we get a very high property insurance estimate from YC Parmia in March every year. We don't actually know what that's going to be until those policies are dialed in with the insurance carriers in July, and it usually comes down. So anyway, after even with those conservative projections, we're still showing a profit for the coming year for over $1 million. And I'll get into the capital expenditure recommendations, but to highlight the cash situation, I mentioned we hit $8.6 million. We spent almost $5 million this year, still leaving us with, after our $2 million profit, almost $6 million in the bank, and for next year, projecting a little bit of a surplus, so we'll still have 6.2 cash in the bank, so we're in a good position. I just went over most of this already. The one on the revenue side, you've probably heard the Yara property, one of the private terminals on the channel. They have a lease with the port. That property's been for sale now for almost a year, and there's some uncertainty about who the next operator or property owner might be, so we didn't budget any revenue related to that. I talked about the expense projection and the cash. So on the capital side for next year, this is the list of the major projects that we're contemplating. The biggest one being a new roof on one of our primary rice handling facilities, Shed 7. We're working with SSA on modernization design. We have to hire an engineering firm to do some electrical analysis and some warehouse design. That'll put us in a position to apply for grant funding, by the way, in 2025. I've included a pretty generous allotment for demolition. That's a bit uncertain, but we would like to get started on that sooner than later. And then we typically have underground utility repairs or other major repair items that are our responsibility for the year. So total capital program of just over $1 million is the recommendation. And I will conclude my presentation there and turn it back to you, Mr. Chair, for any questions.
All right, very good. Thank you, Rick. Commissioner Hurley, questions? Public comment. So we do have slips to speak.
We have no request to speak on this item.
So no requests at the moment. Okay, very good. So we'll turn it to the commissioners for questions.
Yes, just regarding the, and I see SSA here present, I don't know, and Rick, I'm sure you have constant ongoing conversations. When we're looking at the modernization design, just for the time frame for what it takes, like you have it budgeted here, but is there an RFP or demolition? Is there an RFP out to get this done, or what are the plans for, like, what's the timeline to get that work accomplished?
Right, so for the modernization design, SSA's been in contact, and we've been in discussions with the electrical engineering firm to take a look at the condition and capacity of our high voltage network. It's 60 years old now, and we're slowly converting that system, which used to power conveyor systems, to EV charging, for example. And so we really need to understand the condition and capacity of that system. So I would say we're close to a contract. SSA is taking the lead on that piece of it. The other engineering task that's ahead and is a new warehouse design, and for that, we're going to lean on our colleagues with the city and the capital projects department. They have had some staff turnover, but they're ramping up, and by August of this year, we should be in a position to bid out the design work for a new warehouse.
August this year. Okay. And I missed the part for the CMEX surplus wharfage, but I heard about the Yara, given that the land is for sale and we don't know who the next tenant will be and what revenue they can bring. Can you explain the CMEX surplus wharfage and why there's no projected in budget in there?
There is, yeah, so I reduced the projected revenue. I didn't eliminate it, but so we get surplus wharfage, if you will, from SSA, and I put in, I think, $385,000 for that for next year. We're at $585 this year. That's a record high. So I have included the wharfage revenue share from SSA. CEMEX is a much more unpredictable source. Last year we got almost $300,000 from CEMEX. This year we got nothing. I tracked their vessel activity, and it doesn't appear to me that we're going to, they're not approaching the threshold above which they would pay us additional wharfage. So I'm not comfortable projecting additional revenues from CEMEX. We have a baseline lease with them where they pay us, much like the SSA lease, they pay us a base and then additional revenues depending on their volumes.
Okay, thank you. And from reading the operating revenue detail, it looks like SSA North Terminal base rent is our top revenue source here from our operating revenue, and that seems to be an ongoing, reliable revenue source, right?
Correct. That's a fixed contractual amount. Goes up by 1% every year. As you recall, we extended SSA for 5 more years through June 30 of 2028. So that is a very dependable revenue source.
Okay. All right, that concludes my questions.
Quick question. Can you tell me a little bit more about the grant application line? Is that for somebody to find the grants, or do we have a grant and we're looking to pay somebody to apply to their grant? What's the plan for the grant?
Yeah, so typically, a sophisticated grant application requires it's usually an engineering firm that prepares graphics and does the cost-benefit analysis, and so we have experience doing that type of application, and so that's a placeholder number for an anticipated grant application in probably April of 2025 for a new warehouse and/or EV charging facilities.
Thank you.
Right. If there are no other questions, I believe we at least have one slip to speak. Is that right? Rio, you planning to speak? All right. Yep. Now would be the time.
Joe Camillo?
Good evening. Sorry for my lateness. I just came back from my Port of Long Beach. I was down there with my colleagues back down there, so apologize, and thanks, Rick, for the revenue and the update on the budget. Just a quick notes on that. Some of that budget was off this year because of some ships going to Stockton due to the capacity of our warehouse sheds. So we lost about 5 ships, which adds in about $125,000 of revenue to the city. So like Rick mentioned, it's about $500,000 on average we give on just the revenue share for dockage and wharfage. And if we had that capacity, when the rice season gets really congested, we can capture all that business. So that was kind of hard because then it falls into the ILWU workforce and they lose man hours and then they don't get to get registration, things like that. And then on the grant side, grants can take up to 2 to 4 years to get implemented. So it's kind of one of those things I work with Rick and the team on. It's a private-public type of partnership usually, and there's numerous grants out there. We have a whole team now that's working on it, and we're providing and offering services with Rick and the city to like work together to get those grants. But sometimes some of these things are going to pass us by, and all of a sudden we're going to be 3 years out, and we may not be able to capture more business for the future. Short term. So it's just kind of trying to catch it all. Like we applied for a grant this like 2 weeks ago or a week ago, the deadline for a clean porch grant. And it's like 5 different city people that live in the city of West Sacramento, businesses that applied with us, and the Yolo County was the grantor or the person who went for the grant. So we're really happy for that. So thank you for the support letter as well. So that's going to bring more clean equipment to the port as well. But overall, we're working on quotes, and I got solar quotes, I got shed quotes, I have EV grid quotes. We've been working with Rick and been forwarding all that information to him and seeing how we can get things done and moved in the right direction, because I'm getting 6 more $3.6 million pieces of equipment in the next 6 months, and I only have 8 chargers. So I'm gonna have almost $15 million of equipment at the port that I bought and purchased that I need to help move our emissions reductions for the city in the right direction. So those are the kind of things that are updated. And then also I went to Europe 2 weeks ago or last week for a big conference for break bulk for what we do for this type of business, and got to meet a lot of offshore wind providers, cabling systems that they can provide with barges. So that kind of fits kind of our port. When we have that, like Rick mentioned, space to work and that demolition, we can start promoting that, because that's about 5 to 8 years out, but you have to start now.
Right.
Marketing, promoting, so that way we're saying, okay, we can do this cabling at the port here and keep going. So those are things that I'm working on with not only the city, but with the union. And we're like saying, hey, we want to go, it has to start kind of now and start getting that strategic plan. And we're doing it, but kind of not like super formal, but we're working behind the scenes. So thank you.
Good.
Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you for being here. Yep. So before you, so maybe Rick, one of the things we can consider is maybe a major milestones timeline for what effectively will be the electrical work, the bidding out, the partnering with the city on this project, because we've had several conversations about it, and I wasn't aware we've lost that much wharfage as a result,
Right.
directly as a
Yeah, I wasn't
result
aware either.
of the warehouse. So it would probably be helpful to have some semblance of the timeline, to the extent that you can put something together that gives us some framework for what that looks like going forward. That'd be helpful.
Yeah, it'll be in components. The first one out of the chute will be the electrical engineering analysis, and that will be done, I think, this summer. And then maybe the fall timeframe for the warehouse design work.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
I would characterize the wharfage. I wouldn't characterize it as lost. There's no guarantee building a new warehouse will bring that to us. It's, requires a lot of factors, including the Port of Stockton kind of stepping away from that business. And so, and the industry supporting perhaps a surcharge on the rice cargo that we're talking about with SSA. So it's a little more complicated than just saying if we build it, they will come. It's
Commissioner.
we're moving forward with it.
All right. Thank you, Rick.
I just, I do have a couple questions, but I want to follow up just a little tiny bit on this. Because I think what we heard from public comment was that we actually had to turn ships away.
And so I just want to make sure I have the full context, because when I hear that we're turning ships away, that does appear and seem like they would have come had we had the capacity.
So we're competing with the Port of Stockton for the rice business. There are several mills involved in shipping the rice, and two in particular, over the last 10 years, 20 years, have been shipping through the Port of Stockton. And so it's very price sensitive, right? So we're going to continue to compete with the Port of Stockton. So I think what Joe was alluding to is like, and this has been the situation for decades. The rice shipping season is compressed, right? It's not spread out evenly over the course of the year. So rice is harvested in the fall, it's milled, and it ships basically in the winter and spring, and it continues to about now, before the next crop is harvested. So there's not sufficient capacity, warehouse capacity, to store all the rice for all the mills. And so they choose to move some of their product through the Port of Stockton for capacity reasons, but also for pricing reasons. So let's not forget that we're competing with the Port of Stockton. So that is definitely a factor. If we have another warehouse and more capacity, we are certainly in a better position to compete for that rice. But there's no guarantee that we're going to get it. At this point, we don't have any written agreements from any mills that say we will, if you build it, we will bring you our rice. And so that's one of the factors that I'm talking with Joe about.
Could we get a written agreement? If we build it, you'll come, like with set pricing?
Again, it's going to be, that would be negotiated, and SSA would be the lead as the marketing agent for the port, and the collector of the lion's share of the fees related to that business. So maybe.
I'm gonna leave that there just for now. Okay, so for the grant application portion of it, I'm curious because it sounded like what I heard in regards to the 35,000 that was allocated for a grant application is we already have in mind the grants we would be applying for, so we're kind of allocating that knowing that we're going to be applying for these grants specifically. My question is, do we have, so I have two questions actually. One, are we also factoring in some additional dollars for other grant applications that actually just may come up throughout the year, right? We know that sometimes there will be grants that we're not even aware of. In fact, what we heard from SSA is, hey, we're going to be even more intentional about looking for grants and working with you all to apply for those grants. And so did we set aside just enough to apply for the grants we know about, or is it that and some additional for the grants we're unaware of?
So it's dynamic, right? And so we're always in a position to come back to the commission and say, hey, there's an additional grant we want to apply for, and we feel like we need some grant writing support for that, and that's going to be an additional $20,000. What we typically do when we approve this capital, I call it a capital program. So it's $1,020,000 this year. If Shed 7 roof comes in at $400,000 instead of $500,000, then we have another $100,000 left over, for example. So if we run into a need for more funds, we would come back to the commission specific to a project and a grant application. The main application, the main program that's coming out of DOT is PIDIP, Port Infrastructure Development Program, PIDIP. That's, I think it's in its third year, and those applications are due in April. I will say these are not 100% grants. To be competitive, we know that it's going to probably require a 50% match. So this is why we have to do the design, right? So we do a design, we get a cost estimate, and let's say it's a $10 million grant ask. I'll be coming back to you all after I've negotiated with SSA and say, we need more money to pay for the local match to commit to this grant application. So we'll handle it kind of as more information comes in.
Okay, so I just have just a few thoughts based on what I heard. I am not an expert in maritime grants, and so I'm gonna put that out there. What I will say is I do run a nonprofit and apply for grants for a living, and we will oftentimes have grants. It frustrates the heck out of my staff, but we will often have grants that we find out about with 2 weeks' notice. And we will hustle. There will oftentimes be a match. And we put our bid in knowing, the chances of us getting it, right, sometimes are few and far between, but we want to make sure that we are applying for as much as possible, in our case, so we can then pour that money back into the community. I'm curious about the competitiveness that we have in applying for grants when you have to wait to come back to us. It sounds like you're saying even if you did move money around to be able to apply for that grant, you then have to come back to us to get permission to then apply for that grant in order to put a certain amount of match in. I think that's what you're saying, which feels not only cumbersome, but it also feels that we're almost guaranteed to miss out, and it's the highest level of bureaucracy.
Well, we know it's April of '25, and we know that we need design to come up with a cost estimate to know how much to apply for. And so I think, we know what the process is and the timeline and the point at which we need to come back to you for a request if we need that. SSA has a great staff person up in Seattle that is going to be helping on the grant application. So we have the right resources in place.
So the only thing I'm reflecting on is I think how this works. Again, I'm still learning too, to be fair. But you're saying we have the right resources in place and we know when we would need things for this grant or these grants that you have in mind. What you're actually hearing me reflect on is what are potentially other grants that we could be applying for that we may not even be aware of, that may not be in line with this thing we had in mind, that we could potentially be missing out on. That's the only thing you're actually hearing me reflect back to you regarding just how our process works.
Yeah, so we monitor grant opportunities, as does SSA, so we're aware of what's currently available and what we anticipate will continue to be available. Applying for money to build facilities, constructing, a warehouse, for example, to be competitive, we know we're going to need a substantial local match. And so that grant application needs to be, supported by an engineering design analysis and a solid cost estimate.
Okay, last question. In regards to your staff program manager, I don't know, and I probably should be aware, how many staff do you actually currently have? This is a new staff position, and in general, just what will they be doing or just maybe support some of these efforts and support you?
Yeah, so historically, I've been the only full-time staff for the port, and our budget does pay for percentages of the city manager as port CEO, the assistant city manager, the clerical, the city manager's assistant, the deputy city clerk. So those are all positions that support the port administratively, and but they're certainly not port staff, right? That they're just paying for a percentage of their salary. So. I'm 63 years old. I'm not going to be here for, so part of this is, succession planning, right? And we're applying for grants and building facilities. This is consuming work, right? So the extra support is needed, both from that standpoint and just from a succession planning standpoint.
Perfect. Thank you very much.
Very good. All right, so I've noticed we have 2 more slips to speak, so here's what we're going to do. So if anybody else wants to speak, we're going to cut it off right now. Yeah, no, we have 2. We're going to take the 2, but then we're not taking any more because the commission needs to deliberate and make a decision about the budget. So we have 2 slips to speak.
Tim Campbell?
All right, very good. Mr. Campbell, come on up.
Tim Campbell, President ILW Local 18 in the Port of West Sacramento. Good evening. I think we want to clear up a misconception. None of these rice operators in these mills and truckers want to pass our port to go to Stockton. Shed 18 and 19 is being tore down in Stockton. That's historically the rice sheds. They're not going to be there anymore. They just received a $45 million infrastructure grant for rail. They're going to be running soda ash down there. Those 2 sheds are going away. The company went there because we don't have the room in our port to facilitate the rice. You know, it's like taking the rice mills, they have to shut down if they cannot continue to move the rice out of their mill once it's been processed. So they have to find a place to go. Yes, they do want to come to our port. Stockton does not want to be competitive rice. They do not want to do rice. I got a great relationship with their commissioners. They do not want to do rice anymore. They're out of it. They want to do project cargoes. The rice wants to come to our port. But the cost of fuel, the cost of labor, the cost of repairs on the truck, reducing carbon footprints going down Highway 80, it's a big deal right now. And so there are a bunch of grants that would do this. We just had a grant come through that I was the one that created the grant. Me, Tim Campbell. I'm the one that lined it with SSA. And the city said they did not want to sign on to the grant as a government sponsor because they didn't want to be embarrassed from the 2010 Tiger grant. We built a bus stop and the bus never came. It stopped in Stockton. We shouldn't be embarrassed about any of that. We had a crane that through the merit grant that we sold to Bellingham, Washington. Okay? That was the only embarrassing part about it. So this grant is to move a green port initiative to reduce the carbon footprint and be responsible for our ports. The grant got signed on by AQMD, which is good. It's going to reduce the carbon footprint for all of Yolo County. It's great to have that type of deal. But part of this grant was an infrastructure. It could have been met with the amount of money that we had put in for the green cargo handling equipment. We could have also got infrastructure money to build a shed, and we didn't. The grants are out there now. We need to get these grants. We need to service these rice customers. We need to utilize this underutilized port, make more money for the city, create more jobs for workers, and stimulate our economy through this economic driver. By not doing it is a disservice to this city. That's what I got on this. There's grants out there. All these potholes all over the place, there's grants that ports take care of them. I was just at a meeting with Local 13. That's the biggest local in the ILWU. Part of their grants pay for the roads all around the ports. It's a responsibility of the ports to pay for that. There's grants that pay for that. There's 80 grants through the Biden and Harris administration for maritime use. We're not applying for them. We're really spinning our wheels on this, and I believe there's a lot more we could do. We can do better, and I believe we can. I have faith in everybody, but I think we just need to get the rubber to meet the road. So I think more meetings more often. Communication is big. SSA wants to help the port thrive. We need to service that.
Okay.
Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Campbell. All right, next speaker.
We have a second request to speak. I'm sorry, sir, I am unable to make out your last name. If you could read it into the record before you start your comment.
I just wanted to make a comment about, the business that we lost this year. And we did actually lose that business. And Rick is right. Port of Stockton is a competitor for the Port of West Sacramento for that rice trade. However, that business would have came to Sacramento have we had the capacity to store the rice. The rice mills are challenged because they don't have space at their facilities to mill a bunch of rice and store it and then deliver it out. They have to mill it so many days and they have to ship it out to us right away. We try to give the rice mills, sometimes 6 to 8 weeks of time to deliver that cargo prior to the vessel arriving into the port. Sometimes we might give them a little bit more time than that based off of their need and, how much they got going on, because at the same time, they're also stuffing containers and they're milling rice for other vessels that are exporting out of the Port of Oakland. So, this customer, I got a good relationship with, and they would have came to Sacramento, but we just couldn't bring them in because the time frame in which all the other rice vessels were arriving. They're called laycan dates. They have a certain time to get in and a certain time to get out. If they go past that allotted time, they get hit with demurrage penalties. So they get hit with stiff penalties for not getting that cargo loaded and out of that port by a certain time and to the port of discharge. So that does play a factor in sometimes in their decision to bypass Sacramento and go straight to Stockton. However, they would love to come to Sacramento because they're bypassing Sacramento to go to Stockton. That's increasing their cost. Sacramento is one of the primary areas in this, or not primary locations where we've been loading rice for a very long time. The ILW is very experienced in the rice trade. They understand. We got good working relationships with our customers here as well as in Stockton, but they look at Sacramento as one of the places to bring the rice. And the challenge is right now we just don't have enough space to accommodate some of these customers, so they have to bypass us.
All right. Mr. Arciniega, thank you so much. We've had the opportunity, you and I, to talk about this specifically, and I would venture to say that this budget reflects exactly that conversation, and this commission's commitment to finding a way to get to that space. So it's in the budget, Rick. We've got some milestones to develop so that we can demonstrate transparently that we are moving in that direction, and so I feel like that'll make its way to this commission shortly. Yes, ma'am.
So, Rick, can you, there was a slide that talked about the revenue that Joe presented. Where is that slide? Is that it? Oh, okay, no worries.
I believe this is the slide you're referring to.
Okay, the 585,000.
Shows their SSA revenue share of $585,000 for the current fiscal year.
So that revenue share is, I picked up from, and I'm sorry if you presented this and I kind of may have missed the point because I was reading the material that you provided, which would be the budget document, which I hope is posted. But this information, is that a separate revenue source? There's operating and then a separate revenue source. How does that work?
It's part of our operating revenue. It's
Part of the operating revenue.
It's
okay.
over and above the base rent that SSA
I
pays.
see. Okay.
And
Over above.
it's volume dependent. So the more cargo they do, the more revenue share we receive. We receive 25% of the wharfage and dockage revenues above $2 million in any given fiscal year.
Okay. And that's clearly outlined in the budget document.
Yes, it's a line item right under the operating revenue for SSA. You'll see their base rent and then their surplus wharfage dock.
That's the 580, there it is, yes. And so for projected, and then our budget is, so it's going down is what you're projecting. And for you to make that determination, is it from discussions that we don't have the capacity? How did you make the budget 2024, 2025 again?
Well, we have many years of operating history to look to, and so I was actually more generous in 24, 25 than I typically am, just because we have a bit of a track record now. So I don't want to over-promise and under-deliver. So
I see. So you're just projecting.
Yeah.
As far as grants, I know that there are a lot of grants. I've been sending that information. I was sending it over to you, trying to get phone calls and conversations going. I know this is an area of interest to me as well, that I've been trying to engage everybody to have a conversation. And I hope that as we continue, I still have the sources, as we continue to push for requesting grant funding, that we all engage in the conversation. And for this other grant opportunity that I heard about where the city denied wanting to be a part of it, where are we at on the city's participation?
Well, I was a little confused by Mr. Campbell's comments, but Mr. Carrillo did talk about a Yolo County grant. It's actually a grant where the Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District is the lead. And there are several businesses in West Sacramento that are participating in that grant. Divine Intermodal, for example, SSA is participating. It's really, and I wrote a support letter for that grant, and helped a company called MN8 tailor their application to the Yolo Solano Air Quality Management District. So there are multiple companies that are buying electric trucks, for example. And so what we certainly support is electrification of the trucking fleet that calls the port, right, and delivers rice to the port. So I was involved in those conversations with the Air District, starting with Sacramento, and then we redirected to Yolo Solano. And so there are, I think, 5 or 6 private entities that are, part of that grant application. And so it's really about electrification of the trucking industry. And I'm going to disagree with Mr. Campbell on, we just weren't ready for throwing facilities into that grant application. And I will reiterate, I've been talking with Mr. Carrillo for years on this. We need a design, we need engineering design and a cost estimate in order to submit a competitive grant application for facilities. So we are working on that.
That's helpful back. Thank you.
All right, so with that, no other comments. We need a motion to move this agenda for 24, 25 forward.
Early moves.
Lee moves, and
I'll second.
Sulpicio seconds. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? None. Hearing none, right? So we will move forward with a 4-0 vote on that. That takes us to Port CO report. Anything to report?
No report, thank you.
No report. Commissioner communications. Any communications by any members of the commission? Seeing none, we are adjourned. Thank you very much, everybody.